Okay, I think we have pretty much everyone back into the main session. So now we open up the floor for some debate, Q&A, interactivity. So maybe if there's any feedback from the different breakout rooms to start with. Maybe from the moderators of the breakout rooms. Feel free to share some suggestions, discussion. Calum.
Yeah, so I think the moderators, we had a bit of a chat about this, and I think bearing in mind that that time's quite short, what we decided to do was pull together some questions for the panel, which was based on, I suppose, the collective feedback from the group, and we've all I suppose used different mechanisms to capture the feedback, and I think we thought that might be potentially something that we could kind of cascade and disseminate wider once the session is finished, just with the purpose of time. That's
a really good idea, because indeed we will not be able to tackle all the questions.
Okay, so we have a panel debate, I believe. And as I mentioned, the facilitators from each of the breakout rooms, we came together and we thought, well, what collectively are the big questions that we thought we could spend some time discussing just now. How long do we have for this session, Greet?
We have 15 minutes left.
15 minutes, okay, super. So with that then, first question for the panel is, well, one of the biggest challenges we heard from our interactive groups was not just the need to recruit the right group of co-creators, but also the need to keep them throughout the co-creation process. So the first question to the panel is, based on your own experiences, how do you get the right co-creators, and how do you keep the right co-creators? And I will open that for anyone who would like to answer that.
I'm happy to jump in here if that's okay.
Please do.
Yeah, brilliant. Hi, so I'm Marisa Andrade from the University of Edinburgh. I've been involved in quite a lot of these projects over the year, and I guess the most honest answer for me, or from my perspective, is that it's going to be fluid. You know, the reality of the situation is you're dealing with people in their own communities, you know, going through their own experiences. And their circumstances, particularly if you're working with the most marginalized groups, as I have in the past, their circumstances are going to change. And so people will move in and move out, actually, of your projects, out of, you know, your design. And I think that's part of the issue, which it ties in with evaluation, which makes it so difficult to really then evaluate, because, you know, this is fluid. We're talking about human relationships here. So how do you get the right co-creators from the start? You kind of connect with people through, you know, by really connecting with your gatekeepers, but more importantly, immersing yourself within these communities on a one-to-one level, and really focusing on the interpersonal relationships. And how do you keep them there? It's like any other relationship, you know, you have to nurture it, you have to nourish it, you have to foster it, and put in the time and effort and energy. But with the reality, the awareness that it's not going to stay, it's going to be fluid, it's not going to stay the same, and that's part of the process.
And in that regard, Marisa, if in regard of the fluid character, do you suggest that if people have, for example, a group and you have a couple of co-creation sessions, can you still let people join if you're, for example, halfway into your series of sessions that you're doing with this group?
So this is something that we had to really learn quickly during COVID, because we were halfway through an 18-month, I don't know if you want to call it, intervention in multiple disadvantaged communities, which were geographically based. And then obviously we couldn't go into these communities at all. And so we had to rapidly change, we had to adapt. And we all came online, you know, obviously, if we wanted to stay connected. But then by definition, Some people were naturally excluded. People who were very much committed to face-to-face community engagement no longer could, because they were technically challenged, or you know, they didn't have the resources, or it wasn't for them. But on top of that, actually what we did have is a huge new cohort of people joining, you know, for different reasons. So what became a particular design with a particular population became something very different halfway through. So then it was about really kind of going back to the drawing board and thinking, well, does this mean that it doesn't count, what we've done up until now? I mean, of course it counts. We just have to think about how we frame evaluation and how we think about what evidence is and participants are. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other points on this? Indeed, Michelle Farr points out that there's lots of examples of co-production during COVID-19 within the toolbox that she's putting in the chat. Thank you, Michelle, for that. Indeed, it learned us to be very flexible, indeed. Okay. Calum, maybe any other points you want to raise?
Well, yeah, I mean, is there any, do any other members of the panel have any other, I suppose, feedback on that? So I suppose what we've been hearing is this concept of maybe being dynamic in terms of our sampling, how we engage with co-creators. Do any other members of the panel, do you have anything that they would like to echo or provide an alternative suggestion to that?
I was just going to agree with everything Marisa has said, and would sort of just add a couple of points in relation to setting the research questions and what the whole kind of development of the project. Actually, if these come from people who have used services or systems themselves, there's a kind of a different sense of engagement, in the sense it's their project, it's their ideas that are moving forward. And I think that sort of relates back to something I just said in the breakout rooms about what's in it for people, really understanding people's intrinsic motivations of why they want to get involved. And yeah, as everything Marisa said as well, in terms of kind of keeping those relationships, keeping that communication going on is so important.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. And conscious of time, I think we might have time for one more quick question. So I'll pass over to Anneke for that.
Yes, thank you, Calum. Yeah, the next question is, in co-creative processes, you will face conflicts of interest, people from different backgrounds. So what's your suggestion for us to do when we meet conflicts in a co-creative process?
Yeah, I've had my fair share of conflict, and not just myself personally, but also, so what I've been doing is working with community workers who are also working with the design, if you know what I mean. So it's this kind of like cascading of people gathering data and evaluating through co-design. And actually in this recent project, it was a massive conflict, which very much became, well, very tricky. And how we managed it is, well, like radical honesty. You know, you don't dress it up as anything other than, you know, again, it's relationships. Relationships are hard work. Sometimes you have to really nourish and work on sort of how you overcome this. But it's absolutely about voicing things as they come up, rather than waiting further down the line, and they've turned into something that then creates a bit of it, becomes a bit of a deal breaker. And for this particular person, he was meant to be evaluating the project within it, but this conflict became so rife that actually it stopped the ability to evaluate the project. And so what we then did is we wrote that narrative, that experience, that reflective diary, if you like, of what happened within that conflict into the evaluation process. So rather than saying, gaming the system and pretending that we still managed, we didn't. We just sort of named it, and we found another way to integrate that conflict into our findings, so we could learn much more through it. Yeah, so that's how we handled it this last time.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And Michelle?
Yeah, having a process for decision making is really helpful as well, in terms of before you have the disagreement, kind of agreeing how you will make the decisions can be really helpful. So you have kind of like a sense of, right, this is what we will do. And likewise have had a couple of projects where there has been quite a lot of conflict, and I've used actually various different external facilitators as well. So in one we had an external clinical supervisor as well, because we were working with people who'd experienced trauma. So actually having an external person to be able to talk these things through with is helpful. And then with another person just kind of looking at our process within the team and how we make decisions, how we communicate together, but having conversations before any conflict happens in terms of how you will manage disagreement is helpful as well.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yes?
With 1 minute to spare, that's probably us. Wait.
You want to share one last? Yeah, go ahead.
So in our group, we discussed also ethical issues, but if we bring this all together, coming back to the first question of the obstacles and barriers, it is always a question of time and budget. And this is really one main challenge that we all face, that if you plan something very well, it just takes time. So the co-production and the data collection, or whatever you do in a co-productive way, it is just a longer process than having a survey asking simple questions. It takes time, and of course it also requires budget and people who appreciate later on what we put into this. And this is something where we do not just face the difficulties working with people, but also then later on communicating well the value of this approach, especially to people who have no understanding of what is beyond RCTs. And I think this covers a wide range of different problems going into a long way that we have to travel now together.